my mini session on letter confusion investigations, solving the problem of student letter confusion and letter reversals. My name is Holly Ehle, and I'm actually a blogger over at Mrs. Ehle's Kindergarten Connections. I'm also a blogger with the Blog Hoppin' Collaborative blog. And I'm a member of the Get Your Teach On team, where I act as sponsorship director. So my most probably important life's work is being a wife and a mama to 3 amazing kiddos there. And I'm a very active classroom teacher. Before I start today, the topic that we're going to talk about is a very common one, but it's a little complex. So you might be asking, why is she qualified to talk about this? And so I wanted to share a little bit about my professional training. I received my bachelor's degree in elementary education with an early childhood endorsement from Purdue University. I got my master's in literacy and reading from Indiana University. And I also hold a colloquy degree from Concordia University, Chicago. And I have my reading recovery certification from Purdue as well. Professionally, I've spent most of my time in a kindergarten classroom. I've taught both private and public settings. I spent over 7 years as a literacy coach, early literacy specialist, and teacher trainer. And when my kiddos were younger, I spent some time teaching preschool, pre-K, and as you know, I'm a teacher blogger and educational presenter as well. So here's a question for you. Do you have kiddos who confuse visually similar letters? I have had this situation every single year of my career, and if you work with little ones, I'm sure that you have too. You know the kids that I'm talking about, the kids that say B for D, or perhaps write the letter U when you ask them to write the letter N. Well, today I'm going to tell you how to solve those confusions. Before I tell you how to solve them, I'm going to talk a little bit about why they occur to begin with. And we know that from brain research that the brain stores information by similarity. So for example, when learning letters, the brain stores all of the letters that look visually similar. So it's going to categorize letters with sticks and circles together, and perhaps other letters with sticks and curves together. That's how the brain stores information, things that look visually similar. The brain also stores other types of information this way. For example, when kids start learning about animals, they categorize perhaps furry animals with 4 legs together, or animals that live in the water, and on and on. Brain research also tells us that when we need to pull down and respond, that it retrieves information by differences. So what that means is when a child needs to form a response, what they need to do is, in their brain, they go up to that category that stores things that are similar together, and in order to pull down the right answer, they have to look at what's different in order to pull down the response that they need. So we know that this works the same with letters. We said already that our brain has stored letter information by groups that are visually similar. So when they need to pull down an answer, what they have to do is attend to the little minute details of a letter to distinguish the difference, and then to pull down the letter that has the correct response. And you can see what happens with our kids is that sometimes when you'll ask them to identify a letter, they will pull down an incorrect response because they're simply looking at the overall shape, and their brain has kind of categorized all these things that look similar to them. So they think it's a right answer because they haven't learned to attend to the tiny little details. On top of that, if that doesn't make it hard enough, we know that the brain also is initially wired when kids specifically are young to just take in the whole image of something. So if you think about it, if you look at a cow that's facing right, it's a cow. If you look at a cow that's facing left, it's a cow. It doesn't matter which direction it's in. So you can also see in my example here, a chair is a chair, is a chair, is a chair. The brain does not pay attention to the orientation of an object. It's actually wired so that you can see an item in any orientation and you still recognize it, which is great until we start to introduce letters to our kids, because you can see a chair is a chair, but a bee is not a bee. So it's actually, your brain is wired this way. And so confusions are actually a natural process for kids. The simple fact is that some students just do not automatically notice these little minute details, and therefore they have letter confusions. They're simply pulling down another letter that looks visually similar to the letter that they really need. This happens not just with letters, but other things too. As an example, if you've ever been around a toddler and they might be looking out in the yard and see a cat walk by, they might say, dog, dog. Or you're reading a book and they might see a fox and they say dog. They're doing the same things. They haven't learned to distinguish the fine details, so they're generalizing a name for something. I'm going to give you a few more teacher examples. Have you ever been teaching in class and have a student say, Mom, and call you mom or grandma or dad? I'll tell you why. It's actually a compliment. They are storing your name or your label with all of the people that love and take care of them. So when they are trying to respond quickly, they're simply not taking enough time to distinguish the difference, and so they're pulling down another name in that same category. So when they call you mom, it's really a compliment. Let me ask parents this. Have you ever tried to call one of your children and you accidentally call them by one of your other children's names? It's because your brain stores all of the little people you love together. And I know when it's kindergarten assessment time, when I do report cards, I'll often say, can you tell me what your address is? And they'll pop out with their phone number. It's because they're storing all that special safety information in one category, and when they go to retrieve it, they're just not taking enough time, or their brain isn't noticing what's different. So letter reversals work the same way. It's really a natural process. So what do you do if you have a child in your classroom that has these confusions? Now we understand where they're coming from, right? This is so important because usually you'll always have kiddos that have this issue, but you'll often have parents that panic because they'll see this and they'll say, is my child dyslexic? No. I mean, in most cases, it's simply a case that they're just overgeneralizing shapes of letters. So let me tell you exactly what you can do to work out letter confusions. Okay, well, first of all, let me tell you that usually most students just kind of intuitively learn that when it comes to letters, they have to pay attention to fine detail, so that's great. But you will always have a handful of kids in your class that just can't quite do that on their own, so you have to teach them how. So what you're going to need to do is anytime you are working with a letter, whether it be whole group, small group, whatever the opportunity presents, you're going to want to be very specific in your language, drawing attention to the physical features of a letter. So you might say, this is the lowercase b. Let's take a look at that letter. What kind of lines is it made of? Does it have a straight line in it? Oh yeah, here it is. Is the line long or is it short? Which side is the line on? Does it have a curve shape in it? Is the curve shape closed like a circle or is it open? You need to draw their attention to that because when kids look at letters, they're just looking at the overall general picture. They don't notice the tiny things, or if they do, they don't know they're important. So talk about those physical features. That'll draw their attention to that. But you need something else. In order to actually recategorize the brain, to have categories that are more specific and less general, you have to give kids an opportunity to talk about the physical features of that focus letter, but then compare it to other letters so that you can start figuring out, they can start figuring out, oh, that's not quite that letter, and their brain will actually kind of recategorize. So you might say, how about this letter? We talked about B had a long stick and a circle. Could this be a B? But don't just let them say yes. Say why. Tell me, what do you see? What do you see that could make it a B? And let them explain to you, well, the stick is on this side and the circle is at the bottom. And then I might say something like, oh, okay, so you said the stick should be on that side and a circle, so that's a B, right? And they'll say, no, no. And you'll say, why? Well, this stick is long, but it's long at the bottom. When they start to verbalize those things that they're noticing, their brain will actually retain that information much better. It's important for you to draw attention to the features, but then let them do that with their words as well. And what you're going to find is even if you're working on the focus letter B, usually kids who have one letter confusion will have multiple confusions. All of those confusions will start to melt away at the same time because you're teaching their brain how to attend to those details and really how to learn. So it's kind of magical. All right, like I said, every year that I've worked with kids, I have kids that have issues like this. And so instead of like recreating the wheel every single year, what I did is I put together some little resources that I could just pull out and use with my kiddos really easily. Or when I sit down with parents and explain that it's really not a serious dyslexia problem, that we just need to teach the kids to pay attention to little details, I can send these home too. So what I do with this type of resource is we'll talk about the focus letter and what the features of the letter are, and then I'll ask the child to look at each letter type of form and distinguish, could that be our focus letter? And if it is, they color it in. There's lots of different ways that we can use this. For one thing, I want to say, you can do this type of activity on a big chart. You can do it in small groups, different things like that. You absolutely do not have to use exactly the same resources I do. I created it so that I could pull it out and use it. And of course, I want to share it with other teachers. You can grab this in my TPT store if you don't have time, but this is not something that is so difficult that you couldn't manage yourself. You could create a resource like that as well if you want. I don't typically do a letter of the week type of program in my kindergarten, but what I do is I teach handwriting of letters. And so in terms of whole group things, when I'm teaching the handwriting of a specific letter, I'll take that time as a whole group to talk about these visual discrimination activities. I use these types of techniques and materials the most in small groups, whether it be guided reading or just different times when I work with small groups. And for instance, I might pull out that page that I just showed you and in a small group have the kiddos color in the letters that are the focus letter and verbalize what they're seeing. If you have kids, usually I'll have a handful of kids that have letter confusions in my class, but usually I'll have one or two that have intense confusions. And so what you want to make sure to do with those kids is work one-on-one or in a very small group and make sure you're asking those questions. Why can this be the focus letter? Tell me about the features. Ask questions and challenge them. Well, that looks like the focus letter. You know, can you tell me why or why not? Lots of talking. And make sure you're documenting what their confusions are. So if you're showing them a B and they're saying a D every time, then you're going to see patterns of responses. And you might notice that that child is not paying attention to which side the stick is on certain letters. Some kiddos will always confuse N's and H's because they're paying attention to what side the letter is or the stick is on, but maybe not the length of it. So always make sure to document what their errors are so you can see what you need to draw their attention to. This is not just a letter issue. This happens with numbers often too. So you can use the same types of techniques that I'm talking about and the same types of materials. I popped this one together because again, it's something that I needed every year. So I threw that together so that I have a resource always on hand. And I can also, if I've explained this whole technique and this process to parents, I can send those home for practice. And what I do with those resources actually is I use them over and over and over again, because what you'll see, it's great documentation actually. You'll see a kiddo have 15 confusions on one page. They do it again, they'll have 12. They do it again, they'll have 8 because they're learning how to attend to those features. Okay, don't forget to use ESGI for your student assessment and progress monitoring. It actually helps me solve student letter confusions, and this is how. When I use ESGI for my student assessment for letter identification, this is what comes up on my iPad, and I'll ask the kiddos to tell me what the letter name is, and they might say D. So I would indicate, nope, that's not the correct response. I don't tell the child that. I click that on my computer, but I note in here what their response was. And when I go to print out this report, I simply press the parent report tab, and I can mark a point that says print the notes. And when I have that report, it will show me documentation of what their confusions were, so you can look for those patterns of responses there. And then you have it all digitally. ESGI is an incredible tool. If you don't know about it, please stop over to our tables over there, and they'll give you lots more information about how to use ESGI in your classroom. Okay, so we've talked about how to work out those letter confusions, talk about the visual features, and compare letters. But it's summer, and you haven't even gotten your new class of kiddos yet, right? So now maybe you're thinking, wow, I kind of get this. I'm going to think about things differently. What can I do to start the year off to be proactive so that I make sure that my students don't have letter confusions? Here are a few tips. Brain research has shown that one of the biggest things you can do to help your child before they really learn all of their letter forms is to make sure that they've heard the letter labels. We're living in a world where kids don't hear the alphabet sung a lot at home, or they might not hear nursery rhymes and things like that. So you probably are going to have to do a lot more singing of the ABC song and things like that just to expose kids to those letter labels. I know in my classroom I feel like I don't have one more extra minute to teach anything. So what I do is a few times a week I'll say ABC line up, and everybody starts singing A, B, C, D, E, F, and they know that they need to be in line before they get to Z. So just kind of a quick tip to keep singing, because if they can hear those labels before they see the visual form, it's going to help them out. Also, when you begin to teach a letter, be sure to use a formation or a font that is a basic printed form. I am a font lover. Oh, there are so many cute teacher fonts out there, but you have to be very, very careful when you are creating materials, especially name tags or charts for your kids. Use the basic font, because if you throw in little curves or different letter forms, now not only do they have to distinguish one letter from like 26, if you throw in little curves in the beginning, it makes it like doubly difficult for them. So just begin with the basic font, and once they have achieved overlearning of that, then throw in the cutesy fonts. Also, when you're teaching a letter, if you're actually instructing a letter, don't teach the uppercase and lowercase forms together at one moment, okay? That doesn't mean that you have to teach all of the uppercase first and then lowercase. You can teach the lowercase form, focus on that for it depends on your group, a day or so, really get those features talked about, all of that, and then introduce the other form like later in the week. But just give a little bit of processing time. Brain research says that you need to use specific language to tell them. There are two forms of the letter A. It's an uppercase and lowercase. But to start with one. Now, I get a lot of questions on, well, which one should we start with, capital or lowercase? It actually depends on the age of your child. They say if you're teaching preschool or you're teaching your own child that is perhaps younger than the age of 4, start with capital letters because they're more visually discriminate. And also that's what they see more usually or notice when they're little. And a lot of parents use just capitals when they write. But if you have a child that is like pre-K age or kindergarten and they're in the school setting, they're going to see the lowercase versions of letters much more often. All right, also, don't forget that when presenting a focus letter, to make observations about the features, the fine little features of those letters. Specifically, use these words when talking to kids. Talk about sticks, straight lines, curves, opened, like a C, or closed circles, line lengths, and intersections, because research has shown that those are the exact categories. Those are the ways that your brain sorts letters. And so that's what you want to use. Don't forget to talk a lot about those visual features, but ask questions and make them verbalize what they see that's different, because that will help them remember better. Okay, so if I'm going to start teaching a focus letter in my classroom, here are some things that we do in our school. First of all, when I'm teaching like a lowercase a, I always use a verbal direction cue prompt to teach the letter. So I might say circle around, push up, pull down, A, because that will help. When your mouth is saying circle around, if the child's hand is going straight down to put the stick first, that will stop his brain because he's saying circle around, but his hand is just going straight down. So that's great. In our school, we actually have a set of verbal prompts, and we use them in our twos program, 2-year-olds, all the way through 2nd grade. We use the same language. Some kids won't necessarily need that because letter formation will come really easy to them, but it won't hurt them. And the kids who do need it, it will help them so much, and that will really help letter reversals from continuing. Okay, and obviously after you've taught that, we write it in the air, we write it in shaving cream, all those things we've done forever. Then what you want to do, I've done this on chart paper. We talk about the physical features of the lowercase a, and then I circle it. Then you have to provide opportunities to compare letters. That's how your brain's going to sort them out. So I put distractor letters on the paper there, and then we talk about the focus letter and, hey, could this be an A? Why? Or why not? And I could circle them. I could talk about the differences in the features, but the goal is to get the kids coming up and circling them and talking about the letter features. If you're going to do this on chart paper, maybe the first day that you do it, start with letters that are very visually discriminate. You see our focus letter has a circle and stick, but a lot of our letters up there just have sticks. Then you're going to move to distractor letters maybe later that day or the next day that are very similar. Lots of circle and stick letters, so they're really going to have to pay attention to those fine features. And then finally in the end, forms that are very similar. They might actually be the letter form with just parts missing or the orientation flipped, because remember, we have to train that brain to pay attention to what orientation that things are in, because naturally a child's brain is wired to tell them orientation doesn't matter, okay? And again, verbalize what you see. All right. Just a couple ideas that you can do with your kiddos is after I do that, I give whiteboards to my kids and I say, okay, now you guys get to choose. You write any letter. Ask your partner, is that our focus letter? And make them tell you why or why not. So that's a great quick idea. Let's see. Do not teach visually similar forms back to back. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to teach B 1 week if you're focusing in on that whole group or in small groups. Say if I'm working with a small group and I have these kids that have letter confusions with B, I'm going to work with them in all these steps during that week. The next week, do not present lowercase d. It's too quick. Their brain needs processing time. So go away, work with a couple other letters. If they confuse T and X, work on one of those for a while, then go back. What you want to do is really achieve overlearning before you go to one that's super similar. And most importantly, as adults, we don't really think about this, but really think about the fonts and alphabet lines and alphabet charts that you use in your classroom. I popped into a local school and I took some pictures of their anchor alphabet lines, and this is an example of one that I saw, and this is an example of another that I saw, both at the pre-K level. Can you guess which one is best? This one is the one that I would definitely prefer for a few reasons. It has an anchor picture. Kids come to us pretty much knowing what an apple is, so there's already something that they know that they can peg this abstract letter form to. Also, you can see that it's a very clear, basic font. Up here, if you take a look at here, we only have one version of the letter, but if you take a look at the C and the G, if you have alphabet lines like this in your classroom, you could actually be creating letter confusions in your students. So be very careful, because most adults would walk into a classroom and not see anything wrong with that. Think about how the brain processes. Also, sometimes teachers will use little gimmicks to help teach, especially the difference between B and D. And this is a common one. A lot of teachers say, oh, well, remember the baseball's on that side. Think about how the brain processes. The young brain processes pictures kind of as a whole. Will the child care if the baseball is on this side or on that side? No, that's meaningless to them. It's just like the cow that faces right or left. This is what you're going to do. All right, so what you want to do instead, if you want to use a little gimmick, this might work for some kids, but for the most part, if kids have real letter confusions, this isn't going to help them much. Use something that involves their body. So for example, B and D are the trickiest ones, really. And we see a lot of writing reversals. So if you want a quick tip, this is what I would say. When you say the letter B, how does your mouth feel? Straight line, B. That tells them, oh, the straight line comes first when I write it. If you think about the letter D, your mouth is kind of open like a circle. So that can be a physical reminder to them, oh, when I write a D, if my mouth is open like a circle, I want to do the circle on the D first. So thank you for checking out my session so much. I'm glad that you stopped by. Hopefully I gave you some little tips that you can use in the classroom. And if you have any questions, stick around afterwards, or you can message me below here on Facebook, and we'd love to hear from you.